everyone. Welcome to Planner Collaborative's first conversation with one of our professionals, Kelsey LeBlanc. Very excited to have you here, Kelsey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
My name is Megan O'Malley. I'm the founder of Planner Collaborative, and I founded this organization because I wanted to make divorce a little less awful for women. And the way I'm doing that is by creating education and resources, connecting women to professionals like Kelsey to answer all the questions that you have and to build a sense of community. So we are so lucky today to have Kelsey LeBlanc, who is a sleep expert and a sleep guru, something we all need more of. She's going to give us 3 pro tips today for how to help our kids sleep better because we know when they sleep better, their lives are better. And when their lives are better, our lives are better. Life has gotten so crazy for everybody, just navigating the day to day logistics of feeding your kids and getting them where they need to go, managing their big emotions and feelings. And then adding on top of that, your divorce that you're going through or that you're now recovering from. You're co parenting with somebody, potentially for the first time ever. Your kids are potentially bouncing between different homes and different schedules and different routines. And you probably have some type of career or job, potentially other caregiving responsibilities as well. The last thing you need, or any of us need, is sleep deprivation. So that's why we have Kelsey here. She's going to solve all our problems and answer all of our questions about sleep.
I'll try. I'll try.
Thank you. Um, so, just giving a little bit more about Kelsey, I believe you've been doing this work for over 15 years. Can you tell us a little why you got into this, what you're so passionate about?
Yeah, so I've been in the field of applied behavior analysis for over 15 years now. A little bit about my background. I'm a board certified and licensed applied behavior analyst, and I specialize in sleep. So I've been in private practice a little over 7 years now. And when I first started, I was working really with all different types of behavior, and most of my referrals were for families whose kids were demonstrating challenging behavior at home. Just, handful, hard to manage, not really sure what to do. And what I was finding with all of these clients is that when we were assessing, almost all of them were red flagging with sleep issues. So it was just this really
Mm,
common thread. Everybody was struggling with sleep. It's incredibly common. And we don't talk about it enough. I think people kind of just expect that this is how it is. I have kids, kids don't sleep. My kid never slept. This is just how it is. And so I started, really focusing on that. It seemed like a really prominent issue and speaking with families and saying, look, I get it. It's on the priority list. It came up in the assessment, but it's not, it doesn't feel like number one. What if we treat it first? And what I found is that the outcomes after working together, regardless of what we were working on, were drastically different if we targeted sleep first. Everything was so much better. Right off the bat, we saw improvements oftentimes across the board, maybe not, certainly not everything fixed if there's skills that still needed to be taught,
mhm.
but, kids were calmer, they were more resilient, they, less tantrums, they're sometimes less wired. Sometimes, sleep deprivation isn't just your kids look tired, they look wired and crazy. And they're better able to learn and absorb the skills that we're trying to teach them. So if after that we're still working on teaching coping skills and teaching calming strategies and things like that, they're better able to take that in and try to practice it. And same with our parents when we're not exhausted to begin with and already at the end of our rope, the parents were calmer, more patient and better able to implement the strategies that we were working together to, myself teaching them to teach their kids so that we could all get to the point that we needed to go. So it was really just, like I said, the outcomes were drastically different. And the responses that I got from the families that I was working with were, we cannot believe how much our lives have changed just from doing the sleep. Right? They were here for a different issue, and all of a sudden, I feel like a person again. I've had parents say to me, like, I didn't realize how much of a zombie I became, or just how much it was affecting me and my ability to work, my ability to parent my child in the way that I want to, and to help my child learn the strategies that they need. So I fell in love with it. It's a topic that I just find, kind of fascinating on its own.
Mhm.
And then again, it was just so reinforcing for me to have that big of an impact in such a short time. Um, And so I ended up kind of restructuring my entire practice around sleep issues. And that's what I do now. I treat and I speak around sleep.
That's amazing. That's amazing. As you were talking, I was thinking about one of the testimonials I read on your site as someone said they were on the brink of insanity until they
Yeah.
met you. And I think that's what it feels like when you're sleep deprived
Yeah, I mean,
is you're going
sleep
insane.
deprivation is a form of torture, really and
Yes.
truly. And
Right.
so, yeah, it makes such a difference.
Right. Wow. All right. Amazing. Well, I'm so glad we have you here. It feels like this is a great segue into talking about how sleep issues are something that can arise in adults and children
Yeah.
anytime. And specifically, this conversation is focused a little more on divorce and kind of the unique issues that come with that. And divorce is many, many things. And I think for today's conversation, we're going to look at it as a major life transition and a disruption in schedule. And I say this without any judgment or shame or value for all the listeners. It's not good or bad, it's just a transition. And that upheaval has different types of effects on kids. I can speak a little bit to it, and I'm sure you have so much more stuff to share with us, Kelsey. But I know that for children, when there's divorce, when there's big transitions, they also get these really big feelings, and they don't necessarily have the skills to cope with them or the resilience to withstand that. And I think some of the big feelings that they're going to have are ones that a lot of moms and parents in divorce are going to have. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be grieving for a life that's not going to be what they thought it was. There's going to be anger. You know, we feel anger when we feel like we've been wronged. So, how do we help our kids process that big feeling? There's going to be confusion, guilt and shame. Like, did I do something wrong? Am I wrong? And there's going to be some fear and anxiety of what am I going to do when I have soccer practice? How am I going to get to school? These types of things come up. And really, what the kids are saying is, am I safe? Can I count on my people, my stable adults to keep me going the way that I need to be going? And so I know one thing that in learning about all the great work that you do, that there's a lot of different ages and developmental stages. And so I'm thinking about what we might see in infants versus toddlers versus elementary school age kids versus high schoolers. And it probably tracks with their capacity to regulate emotions, right?
Yes.
And it's at some ages kids don't know, oh, I'm feeling this, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to go have a cocktail with friends. Like they can't do those things.
Yeah.
Um so I know that happens. So I guess my question to you is what are you noticing in terms of kids in transition at different ages and developmental stages, and how parents can think about that? Because I'm sure it's not one and done. It kind of progresses.
Sure. Um, yes, I mean, there's so many so
Yeah,
many
it's a big
ways.
question.
Yeah, there's so many ways that, those feelings can manifest, right? Or like you said, there's a lot of feelings that often come up for our kids and ourselves during this type of a transition. And those are going to come out differently for different kids. And some of that depends a little bit on, personality,
Mhm.
their temperament, their experience. Everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different. I think, I often see, again, depending on ages, depending on cognitive levels, right?
Mhm.
Anxiety and worries and fears tend to be more common in our slightly older kids. They can certainly be present in our preschoolers. They may not have the language to really describe them very well, but our young
Mhm.
school age kids, certainly, for our littler ones, they're more likely to just sort of feel they can feel the change in the air, right? They can feel the change in the
Yeah.
energy.
Mhm.
People are behaving differently, responding differently, even if it's simply, new locations and new activities and things that are happening. And so, we're likely to see things like sleep regressions. We're likely to see increased night wakings, early mornings, any of those types of disruptions during the night. Sometimes we'll see sleep refusal,
Mhm.
that kind of frustration and anger might come out, in pushing boundaries around bedtime and, additional anxiety around separating at bedtime. Sometimes we'll even see frustration depending on, which household the child is in. It's really not uncommon for kids to have a more preferred bedtime person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a favorite parent. It's just this is the person that at this moment in time I would rather have putting me to bed, and that's really very common. And if they're not with that parent on a given night, that may lead to, more stressful bedtimes, however that may look, whether it's, again, sadness,
Mm-hmm.
crying, refusing to go to bed, anger, bouncing off the walls. Um, and then, with all of those things, as sleep can be a challenge, it's really common to see daytime behavior issues as well. So kind of like
Mm-hmm.
that link that I was talking about between the sleep and the behavior. If kids are struggling at night, they're more likely to be struggling during the day as well. Being, tired, sleep deprived, can definitely cause, difficulties regulating emotions, difficulties regulating behavior, impulse
Mm-hmm.
control, again, frustration, all those things that can come around during the day. So, those are some of the common things I see when working with families in this type of transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot. And you're navigating two houses,
Right.
oftentimes, two
Right.
physical houses. And then I'm assuming two styles of parenting, two sets of expectations and rules. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see parents make when they're trying to get through this?
Yeah, so I would say it's not so much a mistake as sort of like the fallout, right?
Yeah.
The fallout on sleep, because everyone's doing the best they can. I think one of the biggest challenges, when I am, finally addressing this with families is they've perhaps underestimated the importance of sleep in this big picture, which is so easy to do, right? There is so much being thrown at you. There is so much to navigate aside from, again, your own feelings and ability to process, whatever this change may be bringing to your life. There's a lot of logistics to deal with as well. A lot of things to do, and sleep it doesn't often cue in for a lot of families until they're really deep in it, and sleep kind of shows its ugly head as being a big problem. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's just kind of missing that in the early stages, which, as I said, there's no real it's not so much a mistake as just kind of the way it goes. But it can definitely, focusing on sleep can definitely impact how your child copes with all of these changes and how you cope with all these changes. If you're getting sufficient sleep, you're going to, in theory, perhaps be a little
Hmm.
bit, emotionally better equipped to try to tackle, whatever you have to tackle in your day. The other mistake I would say, kind of really in line with that is not addressing sleep as directly as you might other transitional changes
Mm.
as part
Hmm.
of a divorce. So, you're really looking at things like schedules, parenting responsibilities, do we need to go to therapy? There's all these kind of things that you're checking off the box or checking off the list.
Hmm.
Um, and so not treating sleep that same way because oftentimes the way that we handle sleep disagreements or as you said differing parenting styles
Hmm.
around sleep, which is very common, different routines in different households, different expectations around sleep, is often looks quite similar to the way that you might mediate or work with an attorney around a
Hmm.
divorce, right? We need to get to a place where we can at least establish key components of sleep that kind of need to be in the same place in order for us to have an ideal sleep situation. Everything doesn't have to be the same. That is not, it's not necessary. You can have
Hmm.
different parenting styles, you can have different feelings. Certain elements of routines can look quite different. But there are kind of these little things that, that kind of do need to stay the same, really from a biological standpoint for your
Yeah.
kids' good sleep.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me. I was thinking of that when we were talking, and you said, think of it like a mediator or an attorney.
Yeah.
We will focus so much time on creating a parenting plan, and it covers tons of important things of
Yes.
where the kids are going to go and how they're going to be parented and what medical appointments will look like in school. And I think it's great that you say sleep should be a part of that, and acknowledging
Yeah.
it's okay that it's different. So don't stress that you sing this song and you sing this song, or you don't sing a song, or
Yeah.
bedtime even times are different. I think
Yeah.
it feels less overwhelming to me thinking about it, and hopefully to everyone listening
Yeah.
of,
It
oh, it doesn't have
doesn't
to be perfect.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly the same and it doesn't have to be perfect. Even in, if you think of in a single household, sleep is not going to be perfect. That's kind
Right.
of the nature of the beast, right?
Hmm.
There will be setbacks, kids will get sick, you'll have an exciting event that brings you to bed later at night. There's always going to be things that throw sleep off to
Hmm.
some extent and to some degree. So it's never going to be perfect. So I think kind of like letting that go, control what you can. And
Yeah.
I think parenting plan is a really great place. I would love it if sleep were more of a
Mm.
common component of that plan because I think again if we can just come to an agreement on certain key components, what is the most important? Coming to mind for me, it's sleep schedules, right? And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. In my house, my kids don't go to bed at exactly the same time every night because there's just
Me
human.
neither.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's human, it's real life, right?
Hmm.
We try our best. I aim for a consistent bedtime every night. We try to do our bedtime routine, our wind down, because it helps, with, your body, with your circadian rhythm.
Hmm.
A big part of it is your body knowing when it's supposed to sleep. And that's what
Hmm.
helps you to partially fall asleep easily and quickly and get good quality sleep. So, we can try our best, but it's not always going to be perfect. There's going to be
Hmm.
some wiggle room. But if we can perhaps make an agreement on, this is the goal time, it's not going to be perfect. And
Hmm.
then depending on the scenario, if you have, the ability to communicate and collaborate, trying to communicate when those things are not happening. So,
Hmm.
we had an off night. We got back late, whatever. They might be a little bit tired today. Good to know, right?
Yes.
And I think that is again, in an ideal scenario, would be being able to kind of communicate those things and adjust accordingly, including our expectations, right? Because
Hmm.
I think as parents in general, sometimes we need to adjust our expectations for our kids. They got a bad night, they're sick. We're not going to ask them to do what
Right.
I might do on a normal day.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And don't catastrophize. That's something I always do is
Right.
we've had a bad night. It will never be good again. I'm saying
Yes.
it's
Yes. It
just it's just a
it
blip.
happens. Yep.
We'll get
Absolutely.
there. Um, okay, so we started off talking about these three pro tips that you're going to share because we're all dying to have your
Ah,
insider knowledge.
yes.
So
Yes.
now's the time. Please share what are the three tips? What are the three, if we can do nothing else, what are the
Mm,
three things to do to improve sleep for our kids?
yeah. So if we're operating in two homes,
Yes.
yes.
Yes, as a divorced family where there's two
Yes.
homes and two the transitions and different routines and
Yeah.
schedules and yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would do would be to create similarity wherever you can. And again, this is with a grain of salt, right? This is within reason. If your child has a favorite stuffy, make sure they're either bringing it back and
Mm-hmm.
forth, or if the logistics of moving back and forth between two households is difficult from a packing and transitioning standpoint, get two, right?
Yeah.
It's a stuffy. It's probably not that expensive. Let's have one at each house so that it's always available. And then you have that comfort. Sleep associations are super important and are a really big part of making it possible for us to fall asleep, especially if we're stressed and overwhelmed and existing in, a little more chaos than we're used to. So however we can make those scenarios the same. So things like, if you have a sound machine, have one in each
Mm-hmm.
home, right? It's very easy. It doesn't require anything of you other than to turn it on, so that it sounds the same. That can be a really strong association for
Mm-hmm.
kids when they're going to sleep. Anything, a favorite, like you said, a favorite song or a favorite bedtime story. If those are things, if you can have the book in both homes,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And again, it may not be perfect. We may not have all these things at our disposal, but even something as simple as that favorite stuffy can make a big difference in making them feel calm.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and then I think one thing that we really underestimate in bedtime routines is simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people, like you said, we start to worry and catastrophize. And,
Yes.
there's all these things that we are, especially when you're going through a divorce, there's a lot of things you're not able to control in the way that you might want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the bedtime routine, when it's not in your home, can feel like that, right? I don't even know what it
Hmm.
looks like, right? It's very different from mine. My style is different. I believe different things about sleep. And so I think keeping it simple, again, if you can agree upon a simple plan, all the better. But it doesn't need to be elaborate. It doesn't need to be another stressor in your
Hmm.
day. It really just your child needs to know what to expect and when to expect it, which is really true of all these things. I was thinking before when
Right.
you were talking about, these big feelings and worries and anxieties, so much of it is giving our kids clarity on what to expect, right? We
Hmm.
obviously there's other emotional pieces to this. I'm certainly not diminishing any of that, but we all handle things better when we know what to expect. So, age appropriate communication, age
Hmm.
appropriate, clear previewing, right? And so when we can say to our
Hmm.
kids, okay, it's time to get ready for bed, or better yet, bedtime starts in 5 minutes, right? Give that little cue, that little preview. We're going to go up in 5 minutes and then, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, go into the room, read a story, kiss goodnight, right? Very simple. It doesn't need to be
Hmm.
long. I actually recommend that it's not too long because it can be difficult to do consistently if it's too long.
Yes.
So all of a sudden you're
Right.
running behind and we cut things out, or, I'm too tired. I really can't deal with it today. We're going to cut things out. And that can be upsetting when kids start adding things they like to the bedtime routine because they tend to
Hmm.
do that.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so as much as possible, try to keep it, consolidated so that you can keep it consistent. Simplicity is good, and it sort of takes this other, you know, level of stress off your plate that there's all these things to do at bedtime.
Hmm.
Just going to bed.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Let's see. I think handling different rules in different houses
That's a
is
great
kind
one.
of
That comes up
the
a lot.
other. Yeah, it's a really tricky one. And I think, honestly, I think the most important thing to remember about this is that kids actually adapt really well to environments. It may take some time. Obviously, this
Hmm.
is not the only piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of variables at play. But if you think about in a more simplistic example, when kids are at school versus at home, right? If they go to daycare and they nap,
Hmm.
right? It's funny, parents will say to me all the time, my kid hasn't, they say they have no problem napping at school. They go right down, they nap, they're in a classroom, it's bright, there's kids everywhere, and they just sleep. But when we do it at home, they don't. They give me a hard time. Or, it's totally different at grandma's. Grandma has a totally,
Right.
entirely different routine, but kids they figure out what's expected in each environment and they figure out how to cope with that. And again, as long as I kind of mentioned before, some of those key components are in place, they can look really quite different and still be okay.
Hmm.
The kids will just learn what to expect in those spaces. So I would say, again, the most important thing for me would be consistent sleep and wake times. That's what's going to make it most possible for your child to just fall asleep most easily at the right time, sleep through the night, wake up in the morning, be most rested, have the most restorative sleep. Um, and then, especially when you're in two homes, I would say that it is perhaps more important even to make sure that your child is falling asleep independently. And that may be a skill that
Hmm.
they don't have yet, that something to work on, or they may have it already. But it can be really challenging, if one parent is falling asleep with the child in their bed at bedtime and then
Hmm.
leaving. Kids, they will wake up during the night. There's a whole science behind that, and I could go on and on about it if you want.
That's a whole nother
Um,
conversation in
yeah, that's a
independent
whole
sleep.
nother thing, but they will wake up and you'll see, these night
Hmm.
wakings and also these kind of exacerbated separation issues, right? I fell asleep and
Yeah.
you were there and I woke up and you were not, right?
Right.
I'm already experiencing separation anxiety and now I woke up and you're gone. And
Hmm.
so that can be really upsetting.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important, regardless of how challenging it is, again, work together best you can, work with a specialist if you need teaching your child to fall asleep independently so that you can at least say, good night, I love you. I'm still here. I'll be in the
Hmm.
other room. I'm in the house. I'm sleeping. I'm here if you need me. And again, I
Right.
could go on and on about, being available to kids during the night and why that's important. We don't want to ignore our kids during the night,
Hmm.
as a strategy. There's certainly I guess a time and a place for those types of strategies. But especially when we're dealing with separation issues, we want to make sure that they know that we're there, we know that we're available, and that they
Hmm.
see us leave. And then they're able to access us back. And that will make them over time more comfortable falling asleep
Hmm.
independently. When they wake up during the night naturally, which they will, they'll be able to go back to sleep. So you're not going to experience those,
Hmm.
frequent wakings, early mornings, all of those things because you're gone when they wake up.
Hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it's building trust, really, is what you're trying to do with
Absolutely. It's a
them.
big part of it. Is a big part of it is building trust. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, wow. Those are great tips. As you were talking,
Thank
I was
you.
thinking we definitely in our house, I need to channel your tip of making it simple. I feel like we've gone down this slippery slope of one more story, one more song, one more
Yes.
cuddle, tickle my back, and we're exhausted.
Yep. And they love adding to it. I feel like,
Yes.
my son, we used to, we did one thing one time and then all of a sudden,
Yes,
you
it's a
had this
thing.
new routine from it and it can be hard to pare it down. But
Yeah.
trying to keep it concise helps.
It does. It does. Yeah. We parents only have so much bandwidth too at the end of the day, right? Especially if
Absolutely.
you're, kind of circling back to divorce. There's so much more on your plate than just regular life and parenting and work and caregiving. It's a whole nother layer, and it's okay to not have the bandwidth and to keep it concise and loving, and
Absolutely.
call it a day, and then get your own sleep so that you feel great and you feel rested and you get all the
Yes,
great benefits as well.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I feel like we have 17 more to have about other
Oh, absolutely.
conversations, particularly independent sleeping. I think that's something I've seen come up a lot for people. So we might have to put a pin in that and circle back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, everyone, thanks for joining us today. This was Kelsey LeBlanc. At the end of this, we're going to share a link for you to reach out directly to her for a 15-minute consult so you can talk about what the issues are and see if potentially you two could work together and figure out how to get better sleep for your kids and for you. Also, have a link to Planner Collaborative so you can start exploring more resources and education and learn more. And I hope to see you at our next conversation with professional. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thank you.